Thank you for coming this evening. I'm Catherine Blackledge. I'm the author of The Man Who Saw the Future. It's a biography of William Lilly, England's greatest ever astrologer. And before I talk to you about who Lilly was, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a scientist by background. I've got a science degree and a science PhD, and I've worked as a science journalist for all of my career. And in writing a book about Lilly and about how he used astrology to predict the future, I am, as it were, coming out as an astrologer, which is quite a tricky thing for a science journalist to do. So why am I doing it? Well, The Man Who Saw the Future is my second book. My first book, The Story of V, is about the vagina. Everything you could ever want to know about the vagina, about art, mythology, culture, history, science, language. And you may wonder, well, what's the connection between the vagina and astrology? And I think there are strong connections. I think both the vagina and astrology, they have something of a taboo about them. They're both shrouded in layers of misrepresentation, ignorance and prejudice. Neither are deemed appropriate for polite, intelligent conversation. And I wrote The Story of V because I wanted to challenge the narrow and biased view of the vagina that existed, and I wanted to reveal a view that, an old view of the vagina as sacred and powerful. And I wanted to correct a similar imbalance with The Man Who Saw the Future. William Lilly was the most famous man in the 17th century. And yet we're close to forgetting him. He's close to being written out of the history books. He's deserving of national recognition. He's one of England's true luminaries. And I wanted to make sure that he is never written out of the history books. So, first of all, this evening, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who Lilly was and what he did, and then I'll give you a taster of his predictions of how he saw the future. So first, to Lilly. Well, if you leave this bookshop, and then please don't do it right now, but when you do leave the bookshop, if you walk down Charing Cross Road heading towards the river, you'll get to the Strand, turn east, head towards the city, and before you've been walking for 10 minutes, you'll get to the old Strand tube station. And if you look up, you'll see there on the wall one of London's commemorative plaques. And these plaques are placed there to honour individuals who are deserving of national recognition, who have made an important contribution to British history. The first recipient of a plaque was Winston Churchill. Other recipients have been computer pioneer Charles Babbage, Oscar Wilde, and this plaque on the Strand is to William Lilly. Close to that very spot, approaching 400 years ago, was the corner house where Lilly lived and worked for the majority of his adult life. And over 1,000 people every year flocked to see Lilly at the corner house, and these were people from all walks of life, high-born and low-born. And they were all going there to ask Lilly to tell them something about their future. They weren't going there to ask Lilly to look at their birth chart, to tell them something about their psychology, their temperament, their character. They wanted a specific prediction from him about a problem that was troubling them. And this is what Lilly did. He provided these predictions, and it's what made him famous. And he answered questions on every topic under the sun. Should I get married? Am I pregnant? The most common one was, what is to be done? Others asked, am I bewitched? Should I adhere to king or to parliament? And Lilly's response to each and every one of these questions was the same. He noted the time at which they asked the question. And it was the time at which they asked the question that was the most important thing. Having got the time, and using his location in London, he then cast a chart, an astrological chart, a horoscope, a map of the heavens, of the positions of the planets as seen from Earth. And then he analysed that chart using an ancient astrological technique called horary. And this is how he made his predictions. He used a chart cast for the time that the question was asked to him. And we know all about all these questions that were asked of him because his casebooks have been kept. You can go to the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and it's just wonderful to be able to do it. But you can actually look at all the charts that he cast. You can see how many people he saw every day, 7 or 8 people. He worked on Saturdays. You can see the time that he noted down, the comments that he made about the people. And it's an incredible record of his forecast. But Lilly didn't just make forecasts in the privacy of these one-to-one consultations. He also made public forecasts that he broadcast in the pages of his almanacs. And almanacs were pocket-sized pamphlets containing forecasts for the year ahead. And they were the most popular reading material at that time. In a nation of between 4 to 5 million, 1 in 3 people had a copy of the latest almanac. It was said that even the devil himself always possessed a current copy. And it was Lilly's almanacs that were the best sellers. He was a publishing sensation, and that was because of these forecasts, uncannily accurate forecasts about events of national importance. And in fact, the news sheets, which were the original newspapers, they'd be our newspapers today, but they chose to reprint his predictions in their pages because they knew if they didn't, they wouldn't get the sales that they wanted. And Lilly can claim to be this nation's first ever media darling. He was celebrated in print and song throughout the land. And the century that his life spans, the 17th century, it was an incredible time. It was a time of civil war, a time of commoner rising against the king, and it was a time of all traditional authorities being challenged, regal authorities, religious authorities, and you have new authorities appearing, new religious ones, and science as we know it. And Lilly was there in the thick of it, through all of it. He was the man of the 17th century. There isn't any other individual who can claim to have been so intimately involved in so many of the key episodes of this tumultuous age. And he was consulted at the highest level by all of the key players during the Civil War, by King Charles I, by Parliament, and by the rising radical religious sects. And you have with Parliament, he gave personal consultations to Parliament. Parliament also called him to their army headquarters to meet with their commanders. Parliament called him to the battlefield, to the siege of Colchester, because they wanted him to rally the troops there. You also have soldiers, as they enter the battlefield, people were reading out Lilly's forecast to them. But at the same time as all of this was happening, Lilly was advising the king in private. He advised the king about various escape attempts, and he also advised the king about auspicious times to enter into peace negotiations so that the king will get a favourable settlement. But also, Lilly played a very dangerous game because in public he also predicted that King Charles I was going to die a violent death in January 1649. And that was a very risky thing to do. But Lilly was a man who wasn't afraid of risk. He wasn't afraid of challenging authority, and it became a real thorn in the establishment's side. He was prepared to commit treason. He was prepared to perjure himself in court. He was prepared to stand up to authority, and he did this over and over again. He published controversial predictions, he published inflammatory comments, and it meant that he was in and out of prison the whole of his adult life. And in fact, in 1666, he only narrowly escaped the scaffold, and this was after his prediction of a great plague and then a great fire to strike London. Well, they came true. And just weeks after the Great Fire of London, when King Charles II investigated the causes of it, one of the first names that came up was William Lilly's, and he was dragged in front of the tribunal to answer questions about his involvement in starting the fire, and he was really lucky not to end up hung. It was just his friends in high places that saved him. In 1647, he published his first book, and it was a guidebook to astrology, a how-to-do astrology book, but it was a groundbreaking guide.